Neil Spenceley is next. I'd like you to welcome him. Neil is the head of paediatric intensive care in Glasgow and Scottish Patient Safety lead for paediatrics. He's originally from the Highlands, trained in Edinburgh, and then moved west to start his somewhat bumpy career at Glasgow Children's. He then lived in Tauranga, Sydney, and Vancouver, and bizarrely, he's returned to Glasgow, where the weather is terrible, but the people are positive and funny. His physiological interests include oxygen delivery, the microcirculation, and the single ventricle, but his psychological interests and real passion lie in workplace behaviours, culture, and being glass half full. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay at the back? You okay? Okay, so my name is Neil. I am 48 of the Queen's years old. I am married to Julie, and we have 4 children, which wasn't my idea. So I love downhill mountain biking and I love skiing. And I have 2 new ACLs to prove it. And in my spare time, I head up the ICU in Glasgow, and I'm the National Patient Safety Lead for paediatrics in Scotland. So must have been about 3 or 4 years ago, we had a run of 3 deaths in quick succession on our unit, all of cardiac babies. And whilst that was upsetting for all, it was very clear that during times of stress, certain simmering tensions just percolate to the surface and present themselves as poor behaviours. So let's talk about that. I think I'll tell you a wee story about my great-uncle Neil, who I'm named after and had a profound effect on me. And with any luck, I'll end with this slide, and I had the best seat in the house. So, Uncle Neil, even at 93, he had more hair than I currently do. So he was Regius Emeritus Professor of Organic Chemistry in the University of Edinburgh, and he was a bright boy, and he loved his chemistry. But his real passion was people and running. And his best friend and training partner was a guy by the name of Eric Liddell. And he was very fast, except, curiously, on a Sunday. And his exploits during the 1924 Paris Olympics were chronicled in the film The Chariots of Fire. So after our external review, we set up some work streams, and I was put in charge of the culture work stream, or culture club, as it was affectionately known as. And we were very lucky. We got to speak to some guys around the world who were very involved in healthcare culture. And the first guy was a guy called Gary Kaplan. So he is the chairman and CEO of Virginia Mason in Seattle. And he was very good with his time. He phoned me up at home. I was sitting there, shorts and a t-shirt and a glass of wine, thinking, I hope he can't see me. And I said, Gary, do you know what? I am worried. I'm worried that we are alone. I'm worried that we are an outlier. I'm worried that people are talking about us. I'm worried that it was Neil. Can I just stop you there? Because poor behaviours are omnipresent in healthcare. They are everywhere. Every department, every institution. It's probably the biggest patient safety problem that we have, and yet we don't really talk about it. We then had a good chat with Lucien Lieb, who is brilliant, an ex-pediatric surgeon, the first guy to talk about error in medicine in his JAMA article in '94. Again, excellent with his time. He didn't use the word omnipresent, he used the word pervasive. It's everywhere. And he talked about his levels of disrespect, so that's going to be disruptive behavior, humiliation, passive-aggressive, which I find the most difficult to deal with. Passive, and then there is patient disrespect, which we do all the time. We're late, we don't introduce ourselves, we interrupt. But he didn't realize that there was a 6th, which is institutional disrespect, which is not providing a system, the tools, the time, the training, the wherewithal in order to do your job correctly, which causes frustration and anxiety, poor behaviors, etc., etc. And it's important because disrespect inhibits collegiality, communication, cooperation, the very things that get you out of a jam when you have no plan. And you will have seen this in other sort of areas where you work. It's learned and tolerated and reinforced by the hospital hierarchical culture. And good people leave. But good people remember. And this is an amazing slide from Jerry Hickson, who's a pediatrician in Vanderbilt. So he gets people to draw episodes of Instability. And this was done in a seminar, I think in about 2007. Now, it's very clear what's going on here. There is no sort of ambiguity. I think what's fascinating, though, is it probably took 2 minutes to experience and maybe 2 minutes to draw. But she can remember everything about it, including the date, which was 26 years beforehand. And it's extraordinary because it's not just the shouting that's the problem. You know, it's amazing how little it takes to implode the confidence of an individual or an entire team. It's the, you know, the swear word, the tut, the body language, the whispering, the well-judged silence. And yet we probably all do it to a certain degree. And it doesn't take much for these things to overspill into the performance of the team, and it doesn't take much to overspill into affecting your patient, increased morbidity and increased mortality. And if you are associated with this, and we probably all have been associated with this, then you can become a second victim. Correct terminology? I don't really care, but it's a very good paper. So this was Albert Wu's paper from about 17 years ago. Two things. One, it could have been written this morning. Has actually anything changed? And two, it was a series of editorials in the BMJ, and the guest editors were none other than Lucian Leap and Don Berwick. So brilliant guys. I've been fortunate to meet them both, you know, pioneers in patient safety in the IHI. But who would have thought and who could have guessed that the patient safety program in its current guise, with reducing variation, aiming for zero, dissecting people through data, causing constraint and increased scrutiny, may actually be responsible for more second victims than solving them? Who would have thought that? Well, Eric Hornagel thought that. And he probably thought that about 17 years before then, when he wrote his proposition paper on human error. Why do we blame people for making decisions within the context that made perfect sense at the time? They may have bent rules, they may have gone round about the houses, but it made sense to them at the time. It's interesting how this is being used more and more, isn't it, this word, this sort of human error. It's extraordinary how it's been used in both society and in healthcare. It's amazing that we can now quantify just how reckless we were. What I find really fascinating that if you speak to the safety scientists, they don't actually know what human error means, but they know what it infers if you bring the words human and error together. So we don't help in healthcare because we use, you know, very elderly linear mechanisms, traditionally by tired, knackered consultants or nurses with no time or training, who are asked to go away and find a single cause for an incident and then institute a raft of measures so it never happens again. Even though, weirdly, it's never happened before. And of course, in this world of increasing complexity, and we worked in the most complex sociotechnical system on Earth, bar none, we can't understand complexity. So in this age of needing an answer, we construct a reason rather than finding one. So really what we do is that we subjectively and selectively take superficial information and then we reply it retrospectively to a situation that we were remote from. We add 2 and 2 together, we make 5, and then we blame the person most proximal to the incident in time and space. And hurrah, we've found the cause. Our social anxiety can abate, the institution can take instant credit, and any further meaningful investigation that might involve an altering of the system or money stops dead. Yep, it was him. And we can move on. Surely we just need to blame, retrain, and constrain. Maybe we need more procedures and policies.
You look at a lot of the procedures and policies that we follow. Well, we don't follow them because they don't work, is particularly in this environment. It is the most chaotic, complex environment in an emergency department.
And so we are wasting 15% of our time doing something that is of no clinical value.
Because it came from national, why should they be telling us how to do our job and how to do it safely? And they didn't know what they were talking about because they'd never worked in store.
In order to control people, you tell them what to do through procedures, through trainings, through surveillance, through reminders, through punitive measures.
Somebody's failed to follow procedure, we need more procedures. And we need to punish the person or counsel the person for not following the procedure.
What some of them have even done is declare a war on human error, and they try to stamp out individual human errors, and they try to manage the minutiae of their workers' behaviors and their acts and into the capillaries of their daily existence to try to manage and adjust and control everything that they do.
Why? Why? Why are we doing this? It just makes them crazy, and we go crazy.
And nothing changes. So NASA learned this the hard way, that more of the same just doesn't work. Apollo happened, it's never going to happen again. Challenger happened, it's never going to happen again. Columbia happened, and they realized that actually blaming the widget, the person, the individual, the manager, the pilot, the frontline worker was not going to work. And they were applying technical solutions for non-technical problems in the bizarre sort of thought that this is going to solve everything, and it just mitigates and migrates the risk to appear next to somebody else. And I think Bob Weir's is right. I think patient safety has hit the buffers. The amount of stuff that we're putting into patient safety is not commensurate with the amount of stuff that we're getting out of patient safety. And it causes, sometimes it's had some successes, but it causes anxiety and concern because we are constrained and we are looked at and scrutinized. And I wonder whether in our desperation to be safe, whatever that means, we may actually be creating the very culture and anxieties and subsequent behaviors that we're trying to eradicate. And as Richard Cook said, he's the why? People continuously create safety, often subconsciously at the front line every single day. And it brings into the line about Eric Honagel's stuff about work as imagined versus work as done. So, hello. I am work as imagined. And I can see where you've made all these big mistakes and these big errors and all these sort of events have just trotted through, your system, and they've evolved and ended up in patient harm. And that's a shame. But don't worry, I'm here to help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to block off some of these holes, maybe ones in the top right-hand corner, a few more layers of cheese, and I shall declare you safe from an office about 3/4 of a mile away. Well, that's fine, but I am work as done. And that's Pans. Quite a big beige pair at that. This is not our world. This is too static, this is too linear. If you actually came down to our world, you would see that this is what's happening. We are constantly moving the bits of cheese around. We are opening and closing the holes to compensate for a defective system. And we do it effortlessly every single day. And yet you introduce a new protocol or a new guideline and a new piece of equipment and you don't train us for it and you shout at us because we don't get the results that you want. Well, guess who's standing beside the incident when it happens? Well, it's not you. And the natural question when an incident happens is, why has this happened? Everyone says, why has this happened? But maybe the clever money is to ask, well, why has this never happened before? What is it that the frontline staff are doing successfully every single day, every minute of the day, in a completely intractable system that makes it highly successful? And what is it that I'm doing as a manager which overwhelms their capability to adapt? So maybe we need to do more work as done. So this is my own version of work as done. And I was nursing, I'm a nurse with Jenna, and I was a cleaner with Phyllis on the unit. And I have to say I was humbled, and I was privileged, and I was completely inept. Staggering doing a cleaning shift. So pinny on, gloves, Titan sanitizer, underneath the railings, gentlemen take note. And friends of mine who I'd grown up with in pediatrics for years, came into the unit visiting and walked straight past me because I had inherited the power of invisibility. And the only thing I said to them was what normally both these valued healthcare workers say, and that is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in your way. And yet if it wasn't for Phyllis or Jenna, our unit would be shut today. It really was an absolutely great day. And I would urge all medics to do a nursing shift, cleaning shift. And I know who you are because the blood is draining out of your faces. So what was your greatest race? Oh, easy. So Munich, 1922. Eric and I were drawn together in the center lanes in the finals because we'd won our heats. There was a huge crowd, and they all settled down. It was quiet, and then we got into the blocks. We said good luck to each other, and we meant it. The gun went off, and we went off. And it was just simply the best race and the greatest race of my life. Staggeringly, in medicine, though, we don't look at things that are the greatest of anything. We look at stuff that is failure or rubbish or purported to be a huge problem. And yet, if you read any of Honagel's stuff, maybe there's a different way of looking at how your system performs.
You can either invest in trying to preventing a specific type of event going wrong, which is what we normally do in safety and risk management. But you could also say that the opposite of something going wrong is that it goes well. And you can try and invest in something going well, because if it goes well, it doesn't go wrong at the same time. But if it goes well, it also increases productivity and efficiency and maybe quality and a lot of other things. So your investment is not an investment to prevent something from going wrong. It's an investment in the functioning of the system of the organization. So it's a positive investment. It's not a cost.
So if it goes well, it cannot go wrong at the same time. And he's defined two types of safety. Safety one, which is what the prevailing method of safety is at the moment. We're looking at events that go wrong, which is bizarre because we're defining safety almost by its absence. This is important, but he says, well, we should be looking at other things too, such as safety too. So look at all events, why things went well and why they went wrong in the context of what normally works. This is where your information about your system actually lies. And amazingly, we are immersed in it. It's everywhere. We have highly successful behaviours every single day. You know, I go into work in the morning at 8 o'clock, and then we intubate, we extubate, we ECMO, we don't, we transfer, blah, blah, blah. Come out at 9 o'clock at night, and really, nothing's happened. But that's amazing. That's absolutely stunning. If I was to go home and then, give Julie a glass of wine and say, a toast, my queen, she would say, oh, we are getting a dog. No. A toast to nothing happening. She would just sit there and go, why did I marry you? So how do we manage to get the information from the frontline staff? How do we manage to make them feel valued, to feel psychologically safe, to tell us what's actually going on? And how do we make their jobs easy? Well, it turns out it's as simple as A, B, C, D. So the tenets of asset-based community design is that everybody has a gift. Any member of staff. Everybody has a skill, and everybody has a passion. How do we allow them to find out what it is? How do we connect these people together? And how do we get the information from system performance into the wider group? So the next time you go back to work, whenever that is, try a couple of things. Talk about everyday work. Not just excellence, the mundane, the tedious, the slightly boring. Because there's stuff in the background which is happening all the time. If you think about it, by the time you get to the 20th move of your chess game, you are playing a game that has never been played before. And yet there are 1.3 million people in the NHS treating 1 million people a day, and the vast majority of the behaviours and the results of the systems that are in place are highly successful. Talk about what's strong, not what's wrong. You are immersed in good systems, and the things that make the system work are the people at the front line. And if you are going to be at the front line, walk in their shoes, cross these departmental boundaries, see it from their point of view, see it from their perspective, allow that sort of vulnerability, that listening, that compassion, and then information will come to you about how the system is actually working. And don't sort of think about what can be done to teams, think about what can be done by teams. The answer is already in the room. People often ask me what my definition of safe is. And the answer is, I have no idea. But my sense is that if people want to come to work and can raise their hand when they're worried, or raise their hand when they want to, say to you, I've actually done this, but it wasn't page 48, section C of the protocol, but this is how I got around the problem, then I suspect that probably makes us safer. Because we probably need to work in a dynamic, interactive, communicative society. So therefore, we allow people to use their expertise and their experience to generate a plan B, to generate a workaround, and to manage surprise. There is only one thing that we truly know about our system, and that is, at some point, it's going to do something that we hadn't thought of. And things that have never happened before, well, they happen all the time, and yet we cope. There's no CEO Starling here. And they're not following some 10-point strategic flocking plan. I have to be careful how I say that. But they are negotiating a complex socio-technical system. Yet if you put them in a pen and introduced a hawk in there, I don't think this is of any value in my world anymore. There's no magical ECMO machine or drug or surgical whatever that is going to change the course of medicine anytime soon. And anyway, the interface between emerging science and technology and the patient for now is human. So perhaps we need to steer away from humiliation. Perhaps we need to show a degree of humility. Maybe we need to show humanity, or really just be truly humble in the presence of others, irrespective of their role. So did you win? No. No, I was second. Yeah. So who won then? Oh, Eric did. Yep, he won by an absolute country mile. So I'm puzzled. You said it was the greatest race of your life. He said, yeah, it was. So we got into the stadium. There's 20,000 people there. We were next to each other in the final. We got into the blocks and we said good luck to each other, and we meant it. And the gun went off and we went off, and I was fast. I knew I was fast. I felt fast. But at the same time, I felt humbled and I felt fortunate, because just there, stretching out in front of me, was the most elegant and effortless runner the world had ever seen. And I had the best seat in the house. Thanks for your time. Complimented each other's nicely, like that.
Thank you so much, Neil. I don't think anything I can say can do justice to that, so I'm just going to pass on the mic to Henry.
That was just superb. Thank you, Neil. There are many murmurations of Twitter, but just like the starlings, they're hard to single out. There is people are very interested and very praising of working a cleaning shift and asking why this hasn't happened before. I'm going to assume that's a rhetorical question, but if you'd like to answer it, you may.
I don't really know. I mean, it's quite interesting. I was quite startled by the fact that people walked straight past me, but the thing that really kind of upset me was when I said hello, and they kind of sort of jumped out their skin, and then looked at me, and then they laughed, because, to me that was awful, because they were laughing at a valued, skilled worker who, if it wasn't for them, they wouldn't be able to do their job. So it's everybody has a role, everybody has a skill, everybody has, a gift and a passion. And it's all these sorts of things which are now trying to get into the unit, which makes it, people realize, in fact, do you know what the cardiac surgeons grabbed, it might be working, because the cardiac surgeons, two of them grabbed a photo with Phyllis the other day, because they know her name, and they now say hello to her. All of our fellows now have to do 12-hour nursing shifts, an ECMO shift, and a general shift, or I won't sign the form. I don't know if there's anybody. Anyway, I'm not signing your form until you do that. And then it shows, I think, that vulnerability, the compassion, the kindness, and the openness that you can come to me with absolutely anything. And I know that you have broken rules left, right, and centre tonight, as I've been sitting there with 20 other people and a cast of thousands trying to put somebody on ECMO. But that was fine and it was successful. But what's even more amazing is that nobody else in the unit died. At 3 o'clock in the morning with junior nursing staff who just did what they had to do, in order to make the place safe.
Thank you.
I think I was going to open the floor to questions, so to any of the panel. There's one for any of you who wants to answer this, from Sean McDermott, who asked, I absolutely love these positive messages. It takes much energy to implement. Any practical points to make this a little easier in everyday practice? Anyone?
I think just talking about it and talking about it's funny. I mean, it may just be in Scotland. I don't know, Mark can maybe attest to this, that you say in the morning on the ward round, what went well yesterday, and it's just like you hear a pin drop. Nobody comes out with anything. The minute you say what went wrong, they pin you to the wall. And it's just that dialogue about what went well yesterday. And once you tease out various bits and bobs, it's stunning what people will actually come out with. The other thing that we're thinking about doing now, and we have started, which I think is really interesting, is Steve Shorrock, the guy who did the blog about ABCD. I was talking to him recently, and he says, well, what you do try now is thinking about, if you ask that question at 5 o'clock tonight at your handover, what would you like to hear? and you ask that question in the morning handover. And then that goes to what you were saying about what you think of grows. So it's unlikely that people are going to say, God, I had the most hellish day imaginable. But they're going to say, well, this is the things that I wanted to achieve, and here's how we achieved it. And so you can actually focus on the positive behaviours and the interactions that you're going to have to need with physio, cleaners, nursing staff in order to affect that care. We took a child home the other day for a compassionate extubation, and we hadn't done this for ages. And so we went through all the stuff myself and the registrar, and everything was lined up, and we said, right, what could go wrong? And we came out with a couple of things, and said, well, that sounds pretty good. And then I suddenly thought, well, why don't I do, if we were going to debrief in 8 hours' time, and this is the best compassionate extubation that we had ever done, what would it look like, and what could the potential barriers be to that? So we did that, and then we identified 3 potential barriers that we had never thought of, sorted them all out, and we came back and said, yeah, that's exactly how we wanted it to go. So it is, and I think the safety 1, safety 2 stuff is very interesting, because I worry that we are in a safety 1 world using linear tools to try and decipher negotiating an increasingly complex system. And that creates anxiety and worry and problems with stress. And I think that we need to be looking much more about how do we harness and understand complexity and use more appropriate tools in order to think how our system is truly working. And it's the people at the front line who know how it's working.
Can I just add to that? Because Neil's clearly like an incredibly bright chap, isn't he? My answer to that is much less good, but also important, which is we've just said this is what we do here. Yeah, that caring for each other and putting how we feel and how we look after each other as staff is like, this is something that really matters to us as a group, and this is what we do here. It's not a hobby or an optional extra. It's absolutely integral to what we do. This is a much less clever answer than Neil's, but I think it's important as well.
Okay. A few questions from the floor. Go to you both.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I thought they were all 3 brilliant talks. I've heard Dan speak lots, and he's always brilliant. My question is, often it's the busiest times that we need to look after each other and ourselves the most. And I was wondering if any of you 3 have seen an example in the busiest of shifts that stands out that we could use as something to take away with us.
I just talk a lot all the time. Yeah, I mean, Claire, I think, so I mean, that's extremely important, and like you say, when resources are most strapped, particularly around emergencies, it becomes impossibly difficult. I think that's when the little things become very important, I think. You know, particularly after like a very big resuscitation, I've seen a number of my colleagues, including some in this room actually, who just make an incredibly specific point of thanking people, of making some time and space, and doing that in an incredibly deliberate way. You know, not in a, okay, if there's time for everyone to sit down just for a moment, let's make that happen. Like really putting that as part of the, I mean, it's not on our resus transfer checklist, but maybe it should be. Yeah, at the end of transport ventilators, deliver the child safely to the intensive care unit should come, you know, the bit afterwards. So I think actually focusing on small things in the busiest times can be very important. I don't know if...
I was going to just add, I think it is so important to, and you both mentioned this, to appreciate everybody's contribution. But I think especially if it's overwhelming and chaotic and busy, to give that little bit of acknowledgement or encouragement. I mean, it's amazing. You can just see somebody's exhausted face, but if you say, hey, I really, what you are doing is of value and appreciative, it's amazing. You can find that energy. You can squeeze out even more and having that sense of community and acknowledging everybody's role and appreciate them. I think that has tremendous.
I think you hit the nail on the head with appreciation. I mean, I think about reframing the day. So people will come and go, God, that was so busy, that was hellish, that was this, that, and the next thing. And say, well, actually look at it from an asset-based sort of eye rather than deficit-focused. Look what you have achieved with what you have got in that context. And so when we have somebody who is crashed onto ECMO or a resuscitation, people are automatically a bit down about it. What did I miss? What could I have done differently? I mean, I'm just sitting there next to this child on open chest ECMO after an hour of calling the code, and the cardiac surgeon was at home, and I'm just sitting there going, ta-da! This is absolutely astonishing, because you're right about the well-being and the moral distress and bullying, and these are words which are used probably more often than they should be. And my sense is that if you were talking about well-being issues, one of the biggest spreads, like emotional contagion of well-being and moral distress and things, is talking endlessly about well-being and moral distress. It's out there, but I wonder whether it's got too much sort of focus at the moment. So maybe we should be reframing it in a sort of a more appreciative inquiry sort of way of actually focusing on what you've got and what you've actually managed to achieve with the assets that you had that day.
Thank you. I was very struck by the fact that, like all of us, you can't put a definition on what safety is, but you sort of know what it isn't. I just wondered, in the context of cases that had gone on recently, particularly reflecting on, for example, Chris Day, the feeling of being unsafe, the feeling or sense of things around you not being safe, and whether there are enough systems in place to get people to a position of safety, or get a unit into a position of safety when a sense of unsafety is declared, but, to coin a phrase, nothing has happened like this before in that environment.
Difficult question, and it kind of brings up the idea of has safety had its day? Because we're aiming for something that nobody can define. And if we've been looking at the Safety 1 definition, which is almost defining safety by its absence, it's almost like well-being. We're defining safety by the amount of moral distress that's around. And so we're defining safety by its absence. So there's a thought now that we should maybe actually be moving away from the term safety. And what we should be doing, as Eric Honagle was saying, is we should be aiming for system performance. And system performance is more easy to define, and if you get that correct with the amount of information that you've got from the front line, one of the secondary spin-offs is going to be safety, quality, well-being, all these sorts of other things. So it's a very long-winded and incomplete answer to your question, but I do worry that, as I say, it's part of the patient safety program that we have to be, safety, safety, safety. But I think that that's the wrong thing to be going for. I think we need to be thinking much more about system performance and how did your team perform on that day. Yes, you might be feeling unsafe, but why are you feeling unsafe? What do you think we should be doing differently? What is the solution that's in the room? And it's usually always there. And then sort of coming away from, because it's like safety and what's the other word? Governance. Those are the two words that can stop any sort of, well-meaning process dead in its tracks. I don't really like the governance around that, or somebody says that's not safe. Well, why is it not safe? People just can just arrest that well-meaning intervention. So I think we have to sort of move away from those terms to a certain extent and think much more about system performance and get everybody involved to contribute.
Okay, I think we'll take one final question.
Thanks, Jane Munro from Melbourne. Thank you, all of you. Excellent talks. Both formal and informal leaders, I'm interested in your thoughts on how you think we should train them to be really targeted and able to influence in the different areas. Because I think that we haven't trained our leaders in this space. We've all kind of come to it in different ways, but I think that we need to be able to do that better.
Sounds like a clinical lead question.
Well, so, forgive my sort of juniority and, adolescence on this, but, I've been thinking about this a lot, really, particularly because the clinical lead that I followed is, seriously hot on, performance and, she delivered in a way that I couldn't possibly hope to deliver for the kind of performance that Neil's talking about in a way, and yet that's not really what, I don't even care that much about it, to be honest. I mean, I do, obviously, camera and my trust, but you know, actually, I don't really think that's what I've got to offer, and so I haven't been trained in any of this, but I guess to try and answer your question is, I think we should just be comfortable with the fact that lots of us have stumbled across this in a slightly accidental, haphazard way, and that for some of this there isn't formal training. But the more that we can build in some of what we're talking about, whether it's, you know, attitudinal growth mindsets or specific practical ways of delivering interventions to support staff, or kind of performance and safety related improvements to improve the well-being of our staff, you know, the more we just do it well, and the more we're on board with it together as a team, and it's not like Dan is one of 9 consultants that gives shit about this, and everybody else just quietly gets on with their jobs, the more it just becomes built into what we do. That's my hope. I mean, let's talk in a couple of years' time and see whether I'm right, but I think there's probably something to be said by just doing our talking on the pitch, if that makes sense.
I was just going to add, I think it's so important for all of us to lead by example, that everybody in the team has important input and insight and gifts and perspective. And I think that's, I don't know how you teach that except for to be a good example. I can't tell you how many times staff other than physicians have saved my rear and come up with really good solutions and different perspectives with problems. And I think that's really, really important. We can't try to fit somebody into a certain role or box, but utilize everybody's gifts and appreciate what each unique individual has to bring to the table.
I couldn't agree more with that. It's the only thing and the only person that you can change is you. You can't change anybody else. And if you try and change somebody else, then your initiative is going to fall flat on its backside. And then the thing that is, walking in other people's shoes and showing 2 key things, and that's going to be your own vulnerability and listening. And those are the things that I have had to change, I think, over the last 10 years. When I started as the lead and when I came off the patient safety program, I was just tedious, talking about this and that and the next thing, this QI initiative. But now I've realized that actually I was telling people what to do, and that's why part of the initiative sort of didn't work. So now I get them to tell me what to do, and that is far more effective. I mean, safety, if you want to call it that, system performance, is entirely about communication.
Thank you so much. I hope that's answered most of your questions, but I'm sure they'll be available after lunch. Please join me in thanking our very good speakers.